Now, you and Nassim Harriman have completed research from Mesoamerica that uncovered evidence of advanced civilizations that visited the Earth.
Nassim and I are both scientists. We are looking at current science, but we tend to see a continuity in terms of civilization and humankind. And that involves the archaeological discoveries that help us to recognize that continuity. So through the Mesoamerican sites that we've had the opportunity to work with, there have recently been a series of new discoveries that have been surfaced. Over 4,000 archaeological relics. So they are separate from one another, but they are all depicting common themes. And those common themes are a relationship between the people of the earth and the people of the stars in many, many different levels. Accompanying these depictions is a script. I'm not going to say an alphabet because we believe it is not an alphabet. It is a script that has never been seen before, that predates even the earliest writing known to humankind. And we're also actively working to unlock the secrets of this script so that we are very clear about what is being depicted on the artifacts themselves. What we are seeing clearly are replicas of our solar system in such precise detail. The planets are accurate in terms of their size related to one another, in terms of their orbits, the size of their orbits, the distance between the planets. Rings on Neptune and Jupiter, which we did not even know about until the 20th century. The asteroid belt is certainly depicted in these, and some of the artifacts depict our solar system not from the sun out, but from the cosmos moving in, as if you were coming in from outbound, inbound. So when you look at these unto themselves, of course, they are subject to interpretation, but when you put them into context with evidence that we now have, the biological evidence of an intervention when it comes to human genome, what scientists are telling us very clearly is that we're the product of genetic mutations that happen quickly. They happened very close to the same time that we emerged, 200,000 years before present. Scientists agree on that date. Human chromosome number 2, for example, that is responsible for a brain size 50% larger from our nearest primate. The uniquely human abilities of empathy and sympathy and compassion and the ability to self-regulate our biology all come from human chromosome number 2. Who or whatever is responsible for that, it is not the product of natural evolutionary processes. And the proceedings from National Academy of Sciences have said that very, very clearly. We don't know what it is from. We know it's not the product of a natural evolutionary process. And if that were the only mutation, we could say maybe it was a rare anomaly, but there are other genes that have equally mysterious mutations. They all occurred 200,000 years ago. These artifacts are depicting birthing scenes between humans and beings from somewhere, and not of Earth. But what Steve now is referring to is there is a new body of evidence suggesting that some of these, at least some of them, when we think of extraterrestrial, we think of other worlds. What the artifacts are depicting and what some of the other studies now have indicated is that the beings are not from another world, but they're from our world in another time, in our future.
If you look at a traditional tree of human evolution, it's called the human evolutionary tree. We see human at the top of the tree, and leading up to us are all of what are believed to be these intermediate species, and we're all connected by these lines from one to another and another up to us. Here's the thing, look closely the next time you observe one of these, or look at the one that's on your screen right now. And if you look at the legend, the little box that describes everything that's happening, those lines generally are dotted lines, and the reason they are dotted is because they are called inferred or speculative relationships. Inferred or speculative. That means the scientists suspect they exist, but they have yet to find the proof to actually nail down their existence of this relationship. They're believed to be true, and they have been believed since 1859 when Darwin proposed the theory. I don't know about you, my thinking, since 1859 until where we are right now, it's about 150 years, we have had the best minds in academia, the best scientists. We've had the most sophisticated equipment. We've had the greatest universities. We've had the most funding, the most money, all directed towards solving this mystery of our origin. And I think that if we were on the right track, we'd be further along than we are right now. We would have some of those dotted lines be solid lines, but they are not. They are not. And the scientists keep saying, and I have friends in academia who are teaching this in universities right now, they're saying we just haven't looked in the right place. We just haven't found the right fossil. We just haven't looked in the right part of the world and found this evidence yet. Well, that physical evidence is only a part of the key, because now we have new evidence that's taking us light years farther, and it's telling us why the physical evidence may not be supporting the story. So you've all heard of missing links, and the missing links when it comes to human evolution. The truth is that the missing links are still missing, and I think they always will be, because the evidence suggests they probably do not exist. Let me tell you why. Human DNA is beginning to tell a new story, and that's an exciting story. This sounds like science fiction CSI kinds of stuff. But we are actually able to cull the DNA from a human out of the bone marrow from their fossils that are thousands and thousands and thousands of years old in a way that we have not been able to do in the past. That's the state of the DNA right now. So I'm just going to begin with a story. 1987, Northern Europe. We've all heard of Neanderthal, and we've been taught that Neanderthal is one of our ancestors. Well, 1987, the body of a Neanderthal infant, a baby girl, was discovered in a rare state of preservation that we have never seen before and never seen since. She was carbon dated to about 30,000 years old, and she's supposed to be one of our ancestors. So all of a sudden now, we have the DNA of a being that's supposed to be our ancestor that we can compare to our DNA today to see how much overlap there really is. They were able to pull the DNA out of the bone marrow from one of her toes that was preserved so very well, the bone of one of her toes that was preserved so very well. I'm going to cut to the chase. I'm going to go to the very last sentence of the very last paragraph in the very prestigious journal Nature. From the study that was released in the year 2000, the conclusion of what this DNA investigation showed. So remember, the discoveries made in 1987. The results were only released in the year 2000. Here's what they said. The last sentence says, quote, "The results suggest that modern human was not, in fact, descended from Neanderthals." Modern human was not descended from Neanderthals. That is from the journal Nature, volume 404, March 30th in the year 2000. So now we know who we're not. We're not descended from Neanderthals. And as a matter of fact, since that time, additional evidence has shown that we shared the earth with the Neanderthal, which means we could not have descended from them. All right, so now we know who we are not. Fast forward to another DNA discovery. You've probably heard of Cro-Magnon. That is a term that was used when I was in school back in the 60s and 70s, and it's still being used in some places today. But the term has been replaced. It's no longer used now, and the words that have replaced Cro-Magnon are self-explanatory. Cro-Magnon is now replaced with an acronym that is AMH, the letters AMH. They stand for anatomically modern human. And that tells the whole story. Anatomically modern humans used to be Cro-Magnon. They showed up 200,000 years ago on the earth, and they have not changed since that time. That means they are us, or we are them. The DNA of the anatomically modern humans that showed up 200,000 years ago and our DNA, it's essentially the same DNA. If you were to take the skeleton of an anatomically modern human and put it next to mine right now, except for their legs being maybe a little thicker, their bones, because they were running and walking probably much more than I do, you can't tell us apart. We are them, they are us. We showed up on this earth as fully realized, fully enabled, fully capacitated, anatomically modern humans 200,000 years ago, and we haven't changed. Scientists now believe that the anatomically modern humans, the AMHs, are us, and we are they. Any differences between contemporary bodies and those of the anatomically modern humans of the past are so slight that they don't justify a separate grouping. In other words, although ancient humans didn't necessarily behave like we do, they looked like us, they functioned like us, and they appear to have had all of the wiring in their nervous system that we have today. So stated another way, we still look and function as they did over 2,000 centuries ago, despite our incredible technological achievements. So it's the fact that members of our species, the Homo sapiens, have not changed since the date when our earliest ancestors first appear in the fossil record that poses a problem for the traditional story of evolution. The set of all human DNA, the human genome, was the first DNA sequence of any vertebrate to be entirely mapped. The international effort that made this mapping possible was called the Human Genome Project, or HGP, and it was the result of the largest cooperative biology project in the history of humankind. Well, after the success of the Human Genome Project, the same techniques used to map human DNA were then applied to other living things. Well, the results were nothing short of mind-boggling. Genetic mapping revealed that there is only a 1.5% difference that separates us from chimpanzee. We share 60% of the same DNA with a fruit fly, 80% of the same DNA with a cow, and 90% of our DNA is the same as that of a common house cat. So the big question that comes with these kinds of revelations is simply this: if we have so much in common with other creatures genetically, then why are we so very different from them? The answer to this question goes back to an unexpected discovery made during the Human Genome Project. And the discovery is this: that a single gene can be activated in different ways and to do different things to different degrees. And what this tells us is that it's not so much about what or how many genes we have in common with the chimps or the cows or the flies. It's more about how those genes are activated, or more precisely, how they are expressed. The FOXP2 gene, for example, now understood to be directly linked to our ability to form complex speech and language. FOXP2 is shorthand for the word forkhead box protein P2, a protein that's involved in the human ability for language. Located on chromosome number 7, the FOXP2 protein is coded from a gene that has the same name, FOXP2, and is present in both humans and chimpanzees. And this fact tells us that there's something more than the gene itself that's involved here. There's something in the way the gene expresses itself that gives us the ability to consistently create the sounds of language and communication. Scientists knew from earlier research that humans and chimpanzees both possess this FOXP2 gene. They also knew that the human version of the gene changed or mutated at some point in the past, and that change happened really fast. It didn't happen slowly and gradually, as the theory of evolution would suggest. The mutation happened, quote, rapidly around the same time that language emerged in humans, end of quote. Well, this is a pivotal discovery because for the first time, the specific mutation in FOXP2 was scientifically linked to our capacity to create language. Additional studies took this research even further and determined when this particular change happened. According to Wolfgang Inard of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, the mutations in FOXP2 that make our complex language possible, quote, happened in the same time frame when modern humans evolved, end of quote. A BBC News World Edition report clarifies this relationship And it states that our capacity for language happened when, quote, the changes to 2 single letters of the DNA code arose in the last 200,000 years of human evolution, end of quote. So the speed and the precision of the mutations in FOXP2 occurring in just the right 2 places in the DNA code are further examples of the kind of change that simply does not fit into the theory of evolution. The best science of the modern world has now given us the answer. The question now is, are we willing to accept what this DNA is telling us? Now, I know there's been a lot of controversy around the discoveries that have been made in Egypt over the years. And I've worked with some of the researchers who've done beautiful work on pushing against the mainstream history and the mainstream classrooms and the mainstream textbooks that tell us about what really happened in Egypt. And specifically, one of the best preserved places in Egypt is the Giza Plateau. This is where we find the Great Pyramid as well as the Sphinx. Well, as a geologist, I'm a degree geologist, and I've been fascinated by what has happened with the Sphinx for this reason. The traditional dating of the Sphinx has been about 4,400 to 4,500 years before present. So we're told that that is when the great pharaohs built this structure. The problem has always been that the Sphinx is constructed of material, of rock that is in situ. In other words, it's not made of blocks that were brought in from another place. It was carved out of the natural rock, out of the Mother Earth. And because of that, what we find on that rock, we know happened in that place. It didn't happen somewhere else. Well, here's where this gets really interesting. The erosion that we see on the shoulders and on the back of the Sphinx, we've been told for years that it was from wind, high amounts of wind over long periods of time. That's called aeolian erosion. Well, when geologists from Boston University, and specifically Robert Schoch, when he went in and began examining these erosion marks, what he found as a geologist, he's actually a stratigrapher and a paleontologist, I believe, are the 2 terms that he uses to describe his expertise. What he found is that the erosion is actually not made from wind, it's made from water. It's not aeolian, it's called fluvial erosion, made from tremendous amounts of water moving quickly over long periods of time. That's where the story of the Sphinx gets really interesting, because there has not been vast amounts of water moving quickly over long periods of time for a very, very long time. But the scientist, Robert Schoch and his team, this was their conclusion. They published this in peer-reviewed geologic journals. And the interesting thing was the geologists said, sure, it's obvious. We have no problem with this conclusion. The geologists, the historians, have a terrible problem with the conclusion, because the conclusion says the last time that kind of water was moving through Egypt, where the Great Sphinx is between 8,000 and 12,000 years ago. Well, that messes up all the history books. However, that is what the science is showing us. 8,000 to 12,000 years ago, the Sphinx would have already had to been in place, which means maybe it was built even before that for the water to begin the erosion. In his own words, I just want to share with you the words of Robert Schoch. He said, quote, I came to the conclusion that the oldest portions of the Great Sphinx must date back to an earlier period, at least 7,000 years, and maybe as early as 9,000 years ago, to a time when the climate was very different and included more rain. Krishna and the gods lived, and this is where many of the descriptions in the Mahabharata are actually playing out. Well, up until recently, officially, these were believed to be stories to help convey a message, but not based on anything that is factual. The discovery in the Gulf of Combat has changed all of that. So what the scientists have now found is the remnants of a city, a massive city, 5 miles long, 2 miles wide, possibly 2 separate cities. And when they began dating debris found from within the cities, the dates are coming back around 9,500 years before present, and maybe a little bit older than that, placing them precisely at the time of the Younger Dryas and the results of the Younger Dryas. As the flooding began, what we know geologically is that the sea level was 250 feet lower during that time, during the Younger Dryas, than it was after the flood. So what we're looking at is the remains of a city that was right on the edge of the shore that was inundated when the seawall broke and the massive flood happened, whether it was a result of the Milankovitch cycles or the result of the comet or a combination of all of those. We know factually that the sea level did rise, and it rose enough to inundate many coastal cities. And it is very controversial because the date does not fit into the history as that history is written into the books today. The question is, once again, will we allow the evidence to lead us to the story that it tells, or will we take that evidence and try to fit it into a pre-existing story based upon a theory that was made over 100 years ago?
When we're researching the lost city of Krishna from the Mahabharata, we come across two terms which can be a little bit confusing. We find the word Dvarka or the term Dvaraka. And as we dig deeper and deeper, we find out that these two words are interchangeable for the same lost city of Krishna. But where is this lost city of Krishna located? That's another debate that when we dig into the work of Dr. S.R. Rao, who made it his life's passion to uncover this lost city of Krishna from the Mahabharata, he originally landed in the city of Bet Dwarka, which is just overlooking the Bay of Kutch. Now, what he noticed is that the foundations of the city go down 6 layers deep, suggesting that it's thousands of years old. And he thought, maybe this is it. But the legends tell us that Dwaraka was sunken under the ocean, so he said maybe this isn't it. So we started looking into the oceans around Bet Dwarka, and sure enough, he found sunken ruins, and he went, aha, this must be the lost city of Krishna here. Well, that wasn't good enough. He kept digging. In the Bay of Cambay, also known as the Bay of Combat, that there was a lost city the size of Manhattan, some 36 meters under the ocean. When Dr. S.R. Rao looked at the depth of this lost city in the Bay of Combat, he suggested that may indicate that the city was over 7,500 years old. But as we look deeper into the geological record, possibly this city was sunk back in the Younger Dryas era, some 12,500 years old. So it's going to be debated how old this city is.
Evolution, as we know it today, cannot and does not explain this fusion. And this fusion is key because it's the fusion that makes us human. It's the fusion that sets us apart from all other form of life. It appears to be intentional. And this is where we begin to kind of open the door to forbidden territory in science. So I'm sharing with you the science. This is peer-reviewed science that tells us what happened, and we've just done that. Now there's this gray, this shady kind of fuzzy area. Why would something like that happen? There appears to be an intent underlying this, and scientists don't know who or how or why, and I don't either for certain. I have my sense, my suspicions, but I'd like to explore some possibilities with you. Because the conventional thinking, when we hear about the fusion of DNA a long time ago and the way that happened, we're taught to think in binary terms. We say, well, it's either evolution, and if it's not evolution, it's creationism. Okay, creationism invoking religion, invoking God, invoking a lot of things that seem to be hot buttons for a lot of people. Just because of the implications. And I think for that reason, that's why it has become forbidden territory in science. Science simply cannot prove these things. But there's a third option that has happened. For the fusion to occur the way it did, a mutation had to occur. That fusion is a mutation. It means that 2 genes mutated into the new human chromosome number 2. Or 2 chromosomes mutated into the new human chromosome number 2. Because that is a mutation, the third option is now recognizing that. The third option is called directed mutation. Directed mutation. It means it didn't happen spontaneously from a natural process. Something directed the mutation. We don't know what it was for sure. And this is opening the doors to new possibilities in science and scientific thinking. So where and how that happened, that's where the study is going right now. And what the studies are showing us is telling a story that while it's new for science, in our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions, we've heard this story in different ways many times before. So when we talk about this directed mutation, it opens the door to one of the most controversial facets of evolutionary theory and the ideas and the beliefs that support it and do not. That is called intelligent design. Intelligent design, precisely what it says, that there is a design that is in place underlying the genetic structure of all life, and that some form of intelligence has been the one to direct that. For many people, this is where the religious implications come in. For me, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be about religion. It may, but it doesn't have to be. But the strongest evidence, the strongest argument for what is called directed mutation and intelligent design comes from a principle that I alluded to in the previous episode, but I didn't really explain it very much because I knew we would here. It's called irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity. Here's what I mean by that. If you are walking in a field and you find a watch, okay? Watch lying on the ground, it is a safe assumption to make that some intelligence underlies the creation of that watch. The way the gears come together and interlock, and the way that those gears produce a function that is useful and meaningful, obviously reflects some intent, some design. And that's very different than if we were just to find a rock laying on the ground and we say, well, that rock may have been put there last week, it could have been there for 1 billion years, but didn't necessarily take any intention to put it there. So I'm just using that as an example because some scientists are using this idea of irreducible complexity to validate this idea that there is some intent under this directed mutation. What irreducible complexity says to us, it says that a system can only work when all the pieces are in place to function at the same time. So when we think about our watch, it wouldn't work for one gear to show up, 100 years ago, and then another gear show up 100 years later, and then another gear show up 100 years later. I mean, the pieces may not even be there. They may corrode over those hundreds of years. So you get the idea of what I'm saying here. All the pieces for the watch have to be in place and available at the same time for that watch to become a watch and function as it does. That idea, that principle applies to so many facets of biological life. So we showed up, we haven't changed, and we showed up with all the capabilities that we have today. The next discovery is that the DNA is telling us precisely how this happened and what those capabilities are all about. And the discovery after that is showing us that once we begin to embrace the fact that we appeared 200,000 years ago, fully enabled, fully intact, with everything that we have now, how do we awaken the potential of our appearance, what we showed up with? How do we awaken that in our world today? And this is where I invited you beginning in season number 1. Heart-brain harmony. When we harmonize these two powerful organs in our bodies into a single potent system that sets the stage, all systems go, where we optimize human potential. And once we do that, we have myriad opportunities as to what we do with that heart-brain harmony. We can activate deep states of intuition on demand, powerful immune response on demand, longevity enzymes in our body. We can wake them up on demand. We can create resilience to tremendous change, just like we're experiencing in our lives right now, on demand, and so much more. All of this is happening within this matrix. The next discovery is that science, the science that we've asked to tell us who we are, is now coming back to us with even more answers. And they're telling us that there is, in fact, a field of energy, the web or the net that our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions have always referred to. But now scientists are referring to this as the Higgs field, the discovery in 2012 that we talked about early in this series, in this program. The Higgs field It is out there. It is universal. It's everywhere all the time. It's been with us from the time of the primal release of energy we know is the Big Bang. We know that field is there. We also know that we are that field. Once again, it's a very different way of thinking. Every atom in your body right now is emerging from the field that permeates our existence. We are the matrix. We are the field. The next discovery tells us that we are biologically wired to interact with this field. Now, I personally believe, and this is where I'll separate science fact from my personal beliefs, the wiring is so precise, it appears to have an intentionality. So I call it a design. Now, I'm not saying who or what or why because I don't know the answer, and science doesn't know either. That's the whole point. We will only know when we begin to follow the evidence to the story it tells, rather than trying to fit the evidence into a pre-existing idea. So the new human story, I've just shared with you the essence of the new human story that has unfolded through missing links and where we are so far. The new human story, it's a story of connection, of unity, self-empowerment, self-regulation. Maybe it's no accident that the new human story is emerging now, as I mentioned before, when the world needs it the most, when globalization is forcing us together in ways we haven't seen in 5,000 years of recorded human history.
In the 1960s, there was an American archaeologist. He heard from villagers about this site, Göbekli Tepe, and they took him there. And he found some pottery on a hill, and he began dating this pottery. And the dates for the pottery came back so old that the scientists said they can't be right because civilization is only 5,000 years old. That is what we've all agreed upon. So even though the pottery told him something older was happening, he made a professional choice. He walked away from this site because he said it cannot possibly be as old as what the dates are now revealing. Well, it wasn't until the 1990s that a German archaeologist returned to this site. He did the same dating. The difference is he was not bound by the rigidity of the scientific thinking. He wasn't in that box, and he believed the dates. And he very famously said publicly, and he said to his crew, to his team, he said, if I don't walk away from this site right now, he said, I will spend the rest of my life excavating this site. And that is precisely what he did until he passed just a couple of years ago. So what is Göbekli Tepe? It's a mysterious site. It is believed to be a series of circular temples that are buried under the earth. Apparently, they were intentionally buried. And I say it is believed because they are still buried. Scientists are using Earth imaging radar, Earth penetrating radar, to look into the earth and see these temples. Right now, there, I believe, are 5 to 8 that have been unexcavated. They are circular temples of vertical columns. Scientists don't know who put them there, why they were there, why they were intentionally buried. But the fact that they were has preserved what has been found to such a degree that the hieroglyphs look like they were made yesterday. Some of the most magnificent images of what these hieroglyphs are all about. Some of the hieroglyphs are very mysterious and are now being linked directly to constellations and star systems that were not even acknowledged until the 20th century. So once again, we're saying, how did they know? How did these people know? Well, one of the things that I find really intriguing about Göbekli Tepe is the remains, the artifacts that have been found there. And there have been a series of images of humans that are anatomically correct, and everything is done really well with one exception. None of them have a mouth. The mouth on every one of these is non-existent. Scientists don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. We've never seen anything like that before, and because it is so consistent throughout the Göbekli Tepe site, we have to think that it has some meaning that actually will benefit us in helping to understand the site itself. So we're looking at a series of circular temples underground, buried intentionally. This is where it gets even more interesting. The burial of the sites happened about 8,000 years ago. So remember, we're taught that civilization is only 5,000 years old. This site was buried 8,000 years ago, but the dating now is pushing
its origin back far beyond that. The scientific dating for Göbekli Tepe as it stands right now is between 11,300 and 11,500 years before present. It's over twice as old as what you and I were taught when we were in school and what we're teaching our young people in the classrooms and from the textbooks today. Here's the thing, one of the fundamental tenets of evolution is that nature gives us what we need only when we need it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the way it's stated, Wallace stated this in the 1870s, he said, nature never over-endows a species beyond the needs of every day. Well, the problem is we're all over-endowed because we showed up with this advanced nervous system and the advanced brain, and this is where we're going to go with this conversation, and the extraordinary capabilities that this nervous system gives to us. It gives no other forms of life. Abilities that we have called extraordinary, I personally believe they are ordinary that we've forgotten in everyday life. But right now, mystics
that are being kind of activated at this time to allow us to effectively deal with the high rates of change.
Well, this is the beauty. This is the beauty. So when you put this into the big context, here we are in a time of extremes. We've got to think and live differently than we ever have, and we are now becoming aware that there is something unique about us, that we are endowed with this advanced nervous system that allows us to commune with the world around us and self-regulate ourselves. We're talking about the ability to trigger anti-aging hormones on demand, to trigger self-healing on demand, to trigger enhanced immune systems on demand, deep intuition when we choose to have it. All of these, and we're going to talk about these in just a few moments. So all of these are available to us because of this human chromosome number 2 that no other form of life has, that we showed up with 200,000 years ago. So I think there's a beautiful symmetry to what's happening. And then you mentioned earlier, we may not have in the West a good roadmap for this change, but our ancestors told us this change was coming because it always does. Every 5,000 years or so, Earth's location in space changes, and it changes the way we live on this planet. It shifts climate, it shifts weather, it shifts energetics, how we grow our food, where we grow our food, where we live. It changes the energetics of the human body. And we, under some conditions, we are more aggressive, and then some we are more cooperative. And that now is being directly linked to magnetic fields of the Earth and the sun. All these things. So these are rhythms of nature, cycles of these huge, vast expanses of time that are beyond 1 or 2 or 300 years that scientists are typically looking at. So our ancestors track these. They told us the change was coming, and they have given us the opportunity, the gifts. They say, how do you deal with that change? You deal with the change in the world by embracing the potential within. One of the new discoveries of what we are endowed with is the discovery of 40,000 specialized cells in the human heart that are called sensory neurites. So they're like brain cells, but they're not in the brain, they're in the heart. And these specialized cells, they think, they feel, they remember independently of the cells in the brain. So we have our own language in the heart. All right, we in the West, we come into this world and we're conditioned to look at the world through our brain, and if we're lucky as an adult, maybe we'll tap into our heart. If you go into traditions like the Kogi, for example, in South America, when their children are born, they keep them in relative isolation without a lot of external stimuli, so that they must first interpret the world through their heart. And when they master that, then they go into the world and they begin to learn through the brain. It's just the opposite. And I'm not saying one's right, wrong, good, or bad, but these different ways of embracing our potential give us a different world view.
I think they're the folks who keep their eyes closed when they're first born, and then they learn how to see at night in the dark.
Because these, and this is not a metaphor.
No.
And again, we'll talk about this more in the second segment, but it's not a metaphor. These cells, they literally think and remember. They have their own memories independent of the cranial brain. So the young children, the young Kogi, they learn to interpret the world through this language, and it's a very sensuous, sensual language of the environment and nature, and then they begin to apply the logic of the brain. And the sacred text of Mahabharata tells a story that is believed to have been a fairy tale. It is believed to have been a fairy tale because what it describes is something that is unfathomable up until the 20th century. What this text describes makes no sense until the technology of the mid-20th century. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to read a portion of an English translation to you from this text, and then let's take this translation, apply it to what has been found archaeologically, and see where that leaves us in terms of the cycles in our simulation. So here are the passages from the text. There were two armies that were in a great war at the end of a cycle. All right, the two armies were fighting, and one of the armies began to lose, and they resorted to a weapon that had never been used before. And this is the way the text describes the weapon. It says, a single projectile charged with all of the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 1,000 suns, rose in all of its splendor. A perpendicular explosion with the billowing smoke clouds, the cloud of smoke rising after the first explosion, formed into expanding circles like the opening of a giant parasol. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death, which reduced to ashes the entire race of the Varishnis and the Andakas. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. The hair and the nails fell out. Pottery broke without apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected, and to escape from this fire, the soldiers threw themselves into the streams to wash themselves and their equipment. So the description that you've just heard is from an ancient text. However, what it describes sounds very much like a contemporary description of the unthinkable, of a nuclear explosion happening sometime in our ancient past. Is it possible? Is it possible that these advanced civilizations that we now know are cyclic, that have risen and fallen in the past, that had electricity, that had hot and cold running water and flush toilets and stained glass windows and advanced mathematics of the cosmos and of nature itself, is it possible that they began a path that we are following now? Are we the first atomic civilization, or has there been one before us? Well, the father of the modern nuclear program, Robert Oppenheimer, was asked this very question in an interview that he was doing at Rochester University. There was a student that asked him, and he said, Dr. Oppenheimer, how do you feel after having exploded the first atomic bomb on Earth? And Oppenheimer replied, and his reply shocked the audience. It shocked the person that was asking the question. Because Oppenheimer said, well, he said, not the first atomic bomb, but the first in modern times. Robert Oppenheimer was a student of the Mahabharata. He was a student of the Bhagavad Gita, the related text. And he firmly believed that we are, in fact, a cyclic civilization and that we are repeating a pattern from the past. And if we are, within the context of our simulation, we have to ask, what are the consequences of our simulation if we were to engage in a large-scale nuclear war? Now think about this in terms of this entire conversation. The release of energy from a nuclear weapon is information. Tremendous amounts of information. How much information would be released into the system if we had multiple nuclear explosions in a conflict like we've had perhaps in the past on a limited scale? How long could we continue to produce that kind of information before we reached that capacity, that limit that we talked about earlier? So this whole idea of a simulation is giving us new ways to think about us, about what we're living, about what's happening in our world and what's happening in our lives. If the unthinkable has happened in the past, are we repeating that cycle again in our lives? And if we are, can we recognize it? Do we have the wisdom to recognize it and, as Newton's law says, shift the energy, move to a new course, plug in a new variable into that fractal code so that we can avoid the suffering that obviously would come from such a path? The common thread that runs through every one of the possibilities that I've described, whether we're talking about climate change, or whether we're talking about disease pandemics or war, is that every one of these possibilities is related to human choice. It's the choices that we are making within our lives, now within our simulation, that are resulting in the very conditions that could end this experience based upon the way we think. Now, my sense, personally, my sense is because conflict has played such a dominant role throughout history, and that theme is playing out today, and it appears to be coming to a head. Again and again, this idea keeps coming up. My sense is that we are learning to create a world where war doesn't exist, where it's become obsolete. And we're doing so by developing the potential that lives within each of us as individuals. And remember, the better we know ourselves, the less we fear. The less we fear one another, and the less we fear the unknown. When I was in school during the 1960s and 70s, I was taught that civilization began about 5,000 to 5,500 years ago. The traditional thinking was that around then, the two earliest civilizations, those of ancient Sumer and ancient Egypt, developed in the area where Africa and Asia come together. The rest, as the saying goes, is history. With the exception of a few leading-edge textbooks and forward-thinking teachers, schools today are still teaching the same story. This traditional view of our past makes it sound as if primitive peoples came together about 3100 BCE, before the Common Era, near areas of food and water, and began to build simple homes for their families, structures that progressed over centuries into the steel and glass skyscrapers that we see today. It's a great story, and it makes perfect sense. There's only one problem, however. The story doesn't fit the scientific evidence. And because it doesn't, it's not based in science. A growing body of scientific evidence from multiple locations around the world shows beyond any reasonable doubt that what we've called the first civilizations of traditional history are really not the first at all. Instead, ancient Sumer and Egypt followed in the footsteps of even older and in some respects even more advanced civilizations that appeared and then disappeared much earlier than the 5,000 years traditionally accepted. And while there's a lot that we don't know about these ancient civilizations that are twice as old as traditional history says they should be, one thing is absolutely certain. The history that we're teaching in our classrooms is one piece of a much larger picture. The existence of older civilizations opens the door to some big questions that have yet to be answered. Questions like who built them and where did they come from? Perhaps the question that's most important to us today, what happened to them? How is it possible that huge urban centers could have existed near the last ice age, massive cities and temple complexes built using advanced technologies that cannot be duplicated today, and then vanished from the face of the earth? How is that possible? The answer to these questions may hold clues to surviving the crisis that face our world today. And it's for this reason that I've placed the topic of our ancient history among our deepest truths. For a brief moment, I closed my eyes and listened as the wind moved through the branches towering above me. The breeze that found its way to me through the dense forest, past the layer of sweat and dust that was clinging to my face and arms, was a welcome relief that morning. Even though the air was hot, at least it was moving and provided a break from the stifling heat and humidity of a late summer afternoon in northern Missouri. I remember thinking that there's a timeless quality to moments like the one I was experiencing. Surely, the ancient peoples whose campsite I was excavating that day had had the same experience as they cooked their meals over the fire pit I was uncovering hundreds of years later. Streams of sweat rolled off my face and fell to the ground as I opened my eyes and leaned forward over the shallow depression where my trowel scraped away the next layer of the earth. Only a few weeks before, I had been at the same archaeological site, which was exposing an ancient village with my anthropology class in college. We had been asked to help with the emergency recovery of this surprising discovery. It was surprising because the carbon-14 dating on the initial artifacts recovered showed that it was the home of an indigenous people thought to have lived in the area only at a much later time. The hunting camp beneath my feet was the first evidence that this group of people, the ancient Hopewell, had migrated to the cliffs overlooking the Missouri River earlier than had been known. The emergency aspect of the dig was due to the fact it was located directly in the path of an oncoming highway project that would cover the area forever. For reasons ranging from the cold weather that would soon make the construction difficult, to planning and priorities and schedules and timing, we were told that the excavation could not be changed. In just a few weeks, the blades of heavy equipment would cut directly through the mound where I knelt, and the evidence of this site would rapidly be buried under tons of asphalt and concrete or destroyed forever. Before the construction began, no one knew the ancient campsite was there. As happens so often with archaeological discoveries, it wasn't years of scholarly research that had brought the site to the attention of the authorities. Instead, it was the sharp eye of a heavy equipment operator clearing the area. For just an instant, as the driver had raised the massive steel blade of his bulldozer from the ground, the glimmer of something shiny caught his eye. Maybe it was because he looked in just the right place at just the right moment, or maybe it was because he cared enough to investigate what his eyes had seen. But for whatever reason, on that day, the construction worker stopped his work long enough to follow that ray of light that reflected off of the slick, shiny surface of a piece of pottery that had been buried for centuries. The driver's discovery was the reason why my class had been asked to help. Rather than the orderly documentation and excavation that would normally characterize a dig, we'd been working on a countdown. Within a matter of days, the evidence and history of whoever made their home at this site long ago would disappear. On that day, I was alone at the site. While the construction project continued, the classes had ended, and for reasons of time and money, the official dig was thought to be finished. But nevertheless, I wanted to save as much of the site and the evidence of the people who live there as possible. As I uncovered bits of bone and pottery, flint chips and arrowheads, I wondered how this single find would change the way we see the history of America's ancient heartland. Then I began to think in even larger terms and ask an even bigger question. If our knowledge of local history was still changing, could the same thing be happening on a global level? What else had happened to the people and cultures from our distant past that we've now forgotten? Have there been advanced civilizations that existed long before the accepted timeline of history? And if so, what changed them and their world so drastically? Well, it would not be until decades later that I would discover some of the answers to my questions. In just a few days of scraping away the wet black earth of the ancient Missouri forest, the charred bits of bone and pottery changed the entire story of what had happened beneath the weathered cliffs of northern Missouri long ago. It changed what would be taught in the classrooms of high schools and colleges throughout the world. It changed the timelines and the maps where people lived and how they migrated in the past. It changed the course of careers for archaeologists and historians who had based their work on theories and assumptions made from incomplete knowledge. All of these things changed. They had to because of the new evidence. The existence of physical artifacts and the science linking them to a specific date long ago told researchers a story that simply could not be ignored. And just as the local history of cultures along the bluffs and river valleys of northern Missouri had to be revised to reflect the new evidence found at our dig, the global history of humankind throughout the world must now change to accommodate the new science-based discoveries. History is the invention of historians. This quote, attributed to Napoleon Bonaparte, the self-designated emperor of France, is a beautiful reminder of why it's important to keep our view of the past current, using the revisions called for by the scientific method, even when new discoveries don't fit the accepted timeline of history. In this way, we keep our window to the past honest and our historians current. Until the mid-20th century, the history of civilization seemed pretty much to be an open and shut case. The traditional story of civilization suggests that it began with ancient Sumer, approximately 5,000 to 5,500 years ago, as mentioned previously, and developed through a continual progression of improvements in agriculture and technology and culture that have led to the complexity of cities and nations that we see today. It's a linear story that looks good on a textbook timeline, simple beginnings that have resulted in the complex world that we see around us today. The story is neat and tidy. Perhaps most importantly, it's believable. Each time a new archaeological site confirms another piece of the traditional story of our past, it becomes easier to give a green light of acceptance to the rest of the story. The problem with this, however, is that a growing body of evidence doesn't support the accepted story. Anytime we discover even one piece of evidence that doesn't fit the timeline of history, and that evidence is verified by the best science of our day, then we are forced to change the timeline to make room for it. Amateur archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann's discovery of ancient Troy in 1870 is a perfect example of just how such an adjustment can be made. Schliemann had long been fascinated by the story of the Iliad, Homer's literary classic about the legendary Trojan War, as well as the story of the Trojan horse, and how it was used to accomplish what no army had accomplished before, the capture of the ancient city of Troy. Schliemann asked himself a simple question: what if the ancient legend that the Greeks told to their children was more than a fairy tale? What if it was true? What if the Iliad was the description of an actual event that took place so long ago that the story was all that's left to keep its memory alive? Well, acting on his intuition, Schliemann used the Iliad as a literal map and followed its clues to make one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 19th century. Schliemann excavated 8 layers of earth, each layer representing a previous level of civilization buried under a small mound in Turkey. The place that he excavated was in the exact location where the Iliad said the ancient battle occurred. In the 9th layer, Schliemann found the gates of the ancient city of Troy. And it was then that the world knew that the Iliad was actually a true account and accepted the reality of what most people had believed to be only a fairy tale. And when they did, the timeline of world history was changed and Schliemann's discovery was included. In the same way, Hiram Bingham's 1911 discovery of Machu Picchu in Peru, the so-called lost city of the Incas, resulted directly from the investigation of ancient legends and myths thought to be fairy tales. Following both of these discoveries, history books and lessons had to be updated and changed, and entire careers that had been based upon one way of thinking and teaching had to be adjusted to reflect the new discoveries.
When I was working in the industry with the technology, and again, this was during the Cold War, and we've come light years from what I was given access to in the Cold War. And even in that time, that technology developed so rapidly and was so advanced, the insiders knew that it wasn't ours. We were given insights, technological insights, and in some cases given physical technology. It was given to us. Yeah. How it was applied was up to us. We could have used it for really good and beautiful things, and we have in some cases. And we could have used it, and unfortunately, it was given to us during wartime. So it has been used for power and control and intimidation, purposes of intimidation. So I agree. We have the technology. It's about repurposing what we have already have. I think when I think of us and our relationship to life beyond this world, depending on whose reports you're reading and whose texts, we're already living with life from other worlds. They are so similar to us because we are genetically linked that they walk among us. We probably know them publicly. We may know them in our own circles because we're so genetically close.
For all I know, you may be an alien.
And you may be as well. So well, I guess we'll know in about 4.5 years.
Yeah,
the secret will be out. So the idea that that it's something so foreign, I think, begins to disappear. When I travel and I'm with live audiences, where I'm really seeing the people having a hard time grappling with this is when it comes to religion. The idea that Jesus could be an advanced life form from a higher dimension that has come to instill principles of love. That, for some reason, people have a hard time with that. And the idea that God could be an architect of advanced systems of AI, or the idea that angels could be what we have called ETs or aliens in the past. That's where people are really struggling. But the part that entices me, John, and I think about this a lot, if those beings are so advanced that they have been able to do all of these technological marvels for eons. We've only been here 200,000 years, man. They're eons, and the fact that they are still engaged in war in the heavens, says to me that we have the ability. There's something about us that's willing to move beyond war to solve our problems. So while they may be more technologically advanced, we may be more heart-centered, more empathetic, more emotionally and more consciously advanced to be able to solve our problems without using a war. And that excites me, John. If we could do something on this planet among us because of what we were given that exceeds the polarities of those advanced civilizations, man, I think that's worth a lifetime to explore.